My neighbor called the cops on my horses for drinking from what she claimed was a protected wetland habitat. But when the Border Patrol commander showed up to identify his unit's tactical mounts, her face went whiter than the cocaine they'd seized last week. Rebecca Thornton had been filming everything for her viral HOA crusade, live streaming to thousands, as she accused me of federal crimes, but she had no idea she was about to become internet famous for all the wrong reasons. The way she dropped her phone when Agent Rodriguez flashed his badge and said, "Those are government assets, ma'am," was pure gold. And yes, I have it all on video. Ever had someone try to weaponize environmental law against you only to find out they just threatened national security? Drop a comment because this gets wild fast. It was a Tuesday morning around 7 a.m. when I first noticed Rebecca Thornton standing at the edge of my property with what looked like surveying equipment and a clipboard thick enough to beat someone with. I was out doing my morning rounds, checking on my 6 horses before the Texas heat made everything miserable. My own 3 horses, Duke, Liberty, and Ace, were grazing peacefully near the barn while the 3 Border Patrol mounts I was boarding, Sentinel, Guardian, and Patriot, were making their way down to the large pond on the eastern edge of my 60-acre ranch. Jackson Mitchell is my name, though most folks around here just call me Jack. And I've been running this ranch for the past 12 years after inheriting it from my grandfather. The property sits about 15 miles north of the Mexican border, which is why the Border Patrol often contracts with me to board and care for their horses when their own facilities are overcrowded or under maintenance. It's a good arrangement that helps fund the ranch operations while serving our country's security needs. Rebecca had moved into the new development about a quarter-mile from my property line 6 months ago, and from day one, she'd appointed herself as some kind of community guardian. At 42 years old, she dressed like she was cosplaying a federal agent. Complete with tactical vests covered in meaningless patches and badges she'd clearly ordered online. Her blonde hair was always pulled back in a severe bun that seemed to stretch her face into a permanent expression of disapproval. "Excuse me," she called out in that shrill voice that could strip paint off a barn. "Jackson Mitchell, I need to speak with you immediately about your illegal water usage and environmental violations." I stopped walking and turned to face her, keeping my expression neutral even though I could already feel a headache forming. The morning sun caught the lens of her phone camera, which she had positioned on a tripod like she was filming a documentary. "Morning. Rebecca, you're on my property. Again, we've discussed this." She waved her clipboard dismissively, as if property lines were mere suggestions to someone of her imagined authority. "I represent the Ridgeview Estates Homeowners Association, and we have serious concerns about your horses contaminating the watershed. That pond connects to protected wetlands, and your animals are destroying a delicate ecosystem." I couldn't help but laugh, which only made her face redder. "Rebecca, that pond has been on this property since 1947. It's a stock pond. My grandfather dug himself. It doesn't connect to anything except the rain that fills it." But she was already in full performance mode, speaking louder for her camera. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing is a blatant disregard for environmental protection laws. This man allows his horses, including what appear to be overworked and possibly abused animals, to contaminate water sources that feed into our community's ecosystem." The Border Patrol horses had reached the pond by now and were wading in for their morning drink and cool-off. These weren't just any horses, they were highly trained tactical mounts worth about $30,000 each, specially selected and conditioned for patrol work in rough terrain. Sentinel, a massive bay gelding, lowered his head to drink, while Guardian and Patriot splashed playfully in the shallows. "Those horses right there," Rebecca continued, pointing dramatically at the pond, "are being forced to drink from contaminated water. This is animal cruelty at its worst. I'm calling the authorities immediately." I watched her pull out her phone with her free hand, presumably to call police, while still recording with the other device. This woman had more electronics than a Best Buy, including what looked like a body camera clipped to her tactical vest. "Rebecca, those horses, save it for the judge," she interrupted, already dialing. "Hello? Police? This is Rebecca Thornton, president of the Ridgeview Estates HOA. I need to report environmental crimes and animal abuse in progress." "Yes, I'll hold." While she waited on hold, She narrated to her camera like some kind of discount crime show host. For those just joining, I'm documenting the systematic destruction of our local environment by rancher Jackson Mitchell, who refuses to comply with basic environmental protections. You can see behind me several horses being forced to drink from what is clearly contaminated water. Duke, my lead stallion, chose that moment to roll in the shallow end of the pond, splashing water everywhere in pure horse joy. Liberty and Ace joined him, and soon all 6 horses were having the time of their lives, playing in the cool water like kids at a swimming pool. To anyone with half a brain, it was obvious these were happy, healthy animals enjoying themselves, but Rebecca saw what she wanted to see. Oh my God, look at them thrashing. They're clearly in distress. The water must be toxic. She was practically screaming into her phone now. Yes. Officer, you need to send someone immediately. The horses are having seizures or something. It's horrible. I pulled out my own phone and sent a quick text to Marcus Rodriguez, the Border Patrol sector chief who oversaw the mounted unit. We'd known each other for years, and I had a feeling I was going to need official backup for whatever drama Rebecca was about to unleash. His response was immediate. On my way. Don't let anyone near those horses. 20 minutes later, Officer Dale Patterson rolled up in his patrol car. Dale and I went to high school together, and he looked about as thrilled to be here as I was to have him. He stepped out of his car with the weary expression of someone who dealt with Rebecca's complaints before. Morning, Jack, he said, then turned to Rebecca. Ma'am, what seems to be the problem? Rebecca immediately launched into a theatrical presentation, complete with printed screenshots from what she claimed were environmental protection websites, photos she'd taken of the horses in the pond, and a manila folder that she insisted contained evidence of systematic environmental crimes. This man is destroying protected wetlands and abusing animals. I have it all documented here. Officer, the Ridgeview Estates HOA demands immediate action. Dale looked at the papers, then at the pond where the horses were now standing peacefully in the water, tails swishing away flies. Sentinel had found a particularly nice spot where the water was chest deep and was standing there like a statue, enjoying the cool relief. Jack, are these your horses? 3 of them are, I said carefully. Duke, Liberty, and Ace. The other 3 are boarding here temporarily. Rebecca's eyes lit up like she just won the lottery. Boarding? So you're running an illegal commercial operation too, officer? This just gets worse and worse. He's operating a business in a residential agricultural zone without proper permits. Dale sighed and rubbed his forehead. Ma'am? Agricultural properties are allowed to board livestock. It's not commercial if it's less than. I know the law. Rebecca snapped, which was clearly a lie. And I know this man is violating at least 17 different statutes. I've done my research. She pulled out a binder that must have weighed 10 pounds and started flipping through pages of printed regulations, most of which I could see were from random websites and not actual legal documents. Some of them weren't even from Texas. I spotted what looked like water regulations from Oregon and livestock rules from Vermont. That's when Marcus Rodriguez arrived. Not in a standard Border Patrol vehicle, but in an official truck with government plates. He parked next to Dale's patrol car and stepped out wearing his full uniform, badge gleaming in the morning sun. Marcus is an imposing figure, 6'3", with the kind of presence that commands immediate respect. Rebecca's narrative shifted instantly. Oh good. Federal authorities. Officer, I'm so glad you're taking this seriously. These environmental crimes fall under federal jurisdiction when they involve interstate watersheds. Marcus walked right past her without acknowledgement and came straight to me. Jack? Good to see you. How are our assets performing? Assets? Rebecca's voice cracked slightly. What assets? Marcus turned to her then, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes cold. Ma'am, I'm Sector Chief Rodriguez with the United States Border Patrol. Who exactly are you? And why are you filming federal property without authorization? The color drained from Rebecca's face so fast I thought she might faint. Federal property? I don't. What are you talking about? Those 3 chestnuts in the pond? Marcus said, pointing to Sentinel, Guardian, and Patriot. Those are United States government property. specifically tactical mounts belonging to the Border Patrol. They're housed here under an official contract with Mr. Mitchell, who has been thoroughly vetted and cleared for this responsibility. Rebecca's phone slipped in her trembling hand, but she managed to keep recording. But he's letting them drink from contaminated water. Marcus actually laughed. A short bark of disbelief. Ma'am, that pond is tested monthly as part of our care requirements. It's cleaner than most municipal water supplies. These horses are worth more than your car, and we don't board them with people who would endanger them. Dale was trying hard not to smile as he watched Rebecca's world crumble. So, just to be clear, there's no environmental violation here? None whatsoever. Marcus confirmed. In fact, I'd like to know why this woman is surveilling a federal contractor and recording government assets without permission. That raises some serious security concerns. Rebecca was backpedaling now, both literally and figuratively. I didn't know. I mean, he never said, I'm just trying to protect the environment by harassing a law-abiding rancher and making false reports to law enforcement. Marcus pulled out his own phone. I think we need to have a conversation about interference with federal operations. But Rebecca wasn't done. Even cornered. She tried to salvage her crusade. Well, even if those 3 horses are government property, what about the others, and what about the environmental impact? Just because the government is involved doesn't mean they can destroy protected wetlands. I'd had enough. Rebecca, would you like to see the original survey from 1947 showing this pond was hand-dug by my grandfather? Or maybe the water rights documentation from 1952? Or how about the letter from the Army Corps of Engineers from 1998 confirming this is not and has never been a wetland? Documentation can be forged, she said desperately, still recording everything. That's when fate decided to add its own twist to the morning's drama. Sentinel, the lead Border Patrol horse, had apparently decided he'd had enough of standing in the pond. He walked out of the water with the kind of dignified bearing that only a highly trained tactical mount possesses, water streaming off his muscled frame. He headed straight for Rebecca's surveying equipment. Now, Sentinel had been trained to investigate unusual objects as part of his patrol duties. He was particularly good at detecting hidden bundles and suspicious packages, so when he spotted Rebecca's pile of equipment and bags, his training kicked in. He walked over and began nosing through her things with the methodical precision of a customs agent. "Hey!" Rebecca shrieked. "Get that horse away from my property." But Sentinel had found something interesting. He grabbed what looked like a plastic bag in his teeth and pulled it out of her oversized purse. The bag contained what appeared to be white powder, though I couldn't tell what it was from where I stood. Marcus's entire demeanor changed in an instant. "Ma'am, please step away from the bags and keep your hands where I can see them." "That's just baking soda," Rebecca practically screamed. "For my environmental testing kit. I was going to test the pH levels of the water." Sentinel, meanwhile, had been trained to alert on certain substances. He pawed the ground 3 times and backed away from the bags, a clear indication that he'd detected something suspicious. Guardian and Patriot had also exited the pond and were now standing at attention, their training evident in their alert postures. Dale radioed for backup while Marcus approached Rebecca's equipment carefully. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to explain why you have what appears to be testing materials that our detection horse has alerted on." Rebecca was in full panic mode now, her phone shaking as she continued to record. "This is harassment. I'm a citizen scientist. I have every right to test water quality. That horse doesn't know what it's doing. That horse," Marcus said coolly, "has been responsible for over 200 drug seizures along the border. He's testified in federal court. Metaphorically speaking, his alert is probable cause." The situation escalated quickly from there. Within minutes, 2 more police units arrived, along with a Border Patrol K-9 unit. Rebecca's environmental testing kit was spread out on the hood of Dale's patrol car, revealing a bizarre collection of chemicals, testing strips, and yes, several bags of white powder that she insisted were various salts and compounds for water testing. While the officers sorted through her kit, I noticed something else. Rebecca's surveying equipment included several small cameras, the kind designed to be hidden in trees or posts. She'd apparently been planning to set up surveillance on my property to document what she believed were environmental crimes. "Jack, Dale called out, holding up one of the cameras. You know anything about these? First time I'm seeing them, I said, but I'm betting they were meant for my fence posts. Rebecca tried to defend herself, her voice getting higher and more frantic. It's not illegal to monitor environmental crimes. I have every right to document violations. On private property? Marcus asked. Without consent? While surveilling federal assets? He shook his head. Ma'am, you've gone from being a nuisance to being a legitimate security concern. The YouTube livestream was still running, and I could see the comment count climbing rapidly. Rebecca's followers were getting quite a show, though probably not the one she'd intended. Comments ranged from, "Is she getting arrested?" to, "Those horses are gorgeous," to, "This is what happens when hoe Karens go too far." Marcus made a call to his superiors, while Dale finished documenting Rebecca's equipment. The baking soda story was probably true, but she'd mixed it with so many other chemicals that the field tests were inconclusive. What was clear was that she'd been planning an elaborate operation to frame me for environmental crimes. I found these in her binder, one of the officers said, holding up what looked like official letterhead. Looks like she was making her own violation notices. Sure enough, Rebecca had created an entire set of fake documentation, complete with an official-looking seal for the Ridgeview Environmental Protection Committee, which, as far as I knew, didn't exist. She'd been planning to post these around the neighborhood and possibly send them to real agencies to trigger investigations. The horses, meanwhile, had decided the morning's entertainment was over and had wandered back to the barn area. Sentinel kept looking back at Rebecca's bags, clearly proud of his find. Even if it was just baking soda, his alert had exposed her entire scheme. "Ma'am," Dale said finally, "I'm not arresting you today, but you're receiving citations for filing a false police report, attempted trespassing, and harassment. The federal charges, if any, will be up to Sector Chief Rodriguez and his superiors." Rebecca's face cycled through emotions like a broken slot machine. "This is ridiculous. I'm trying to protect the environment. Just because he has some deal with the Border Patrol doesn't mean he can destroy our ecosystem." "What ecosystem?" I finally asked, my patience completely gone. "Rebecca, you live in a housing development that was built on a former cotton field. 5 years ago, this was all agricultural land. The only ecosystem here is the one my family has been maintaining for 3 generations. She turned on me then, her face twisted with rage. "You think you're so smart, don't you? With your grandfather's land and your special government contracts, well, this isn't over. The Ridgeview Estates HOA has resources, and we will not stand by while you destroy our community's environmental heritage." "Your community's environmental heritage?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Your HOA president drives a Hummer. Your vice president had his entire yard paved with concrete, and your treasurer runs a lawn service that probably uses more chemicals in a week than have ever touched my pond. But sir, I'm the environmental threat." Marcus stepped between us. "I think it's time for everyone to go their separate ways. Ma'am, you're going to pack up your equipment and leave. If I see you near this property again, especially with recording equipment pointed at federal assets, we're going to have a much more serious conversation." Rebecca began gathering her things, muttering about conspiracies and government cover-ups. Her live stream was still running, and I could see her trying to spin the narrative for her audience. As you can see, folks, the corruption runs deep. They're using federal authority to protect environmental criminals, but the Ridgeview Estates HOA won't be silenced. We'll continue fighting for our community's rights. As she loaded her equipment into her white SUV, plastered with HOA stickers and environmental slogans, one of the Border Patrol dogs alerted on her vehicle. The handler looked surprised and called Marcus over. They had a brief, quiet conversation that made Rebecca freeze in place. "Ma'am," Marcus said slowly, "our K9 unit has indicated on your vehicle. I'm going to need you to step away and keep your hands visible." "This is insane," Rebecca shrieked. "You're planting evidence. This is retaliation." But the dog was sitting calmly next to her rear bumper, the picture of professional certainty. The handler asked for consent to search, which Rebecca refused, leading to more phone calls and discussions about probable cause and federal jurisdiction. While they sorted out the legal complexities, I noticed something interesting. Rebecca's HOA vest had a pocket that was partially unzipped, and inside I could see what looked like more of those fake official documents. She'd come prepared for a full assault on my ranch, complete with fraudulent paperwork to make it look legitimate. The search of her vehicle, when it finally happened, revealed more of the same. Fake citations, manufactured evidence, and an entire file box of documentation she'd created to support her environmental crusade. There were photos of my horses that had been edited to make them look malnourished, water samples in containers labeled with dates when I knew she hadn't been on my property, and even a USB drive that the officers bagged as evidence. The dog was alerting on the chemicals. The handler explained to Dale, "She's got enough testing kit supplies in here to stock a high school chemistry lab. All legal." But definitely what triggered the alert. Rebecca was beyond furious now. Standing between two officers while her SUV was methodically searched, her live stream had been ended by one of the officers. But not before thousands of people had witnessed her complete humiliation. The HOA president, who'd set out to expose environmental crimes, had instead exposed herself as a fraud and a harasser. Marcus pulled me aside while the search continued. "Jack, I'm sorry about all this. We background check all our contractors. And we know you run a clean operation. These horses have never been better cared for. But this woman is a security risk now. She's been surveilling federal assets. And that's something we take very seriously." I nodded, watching as more evidence of Rebecca's schemes was pulled from her vehicle. What happens now? Now she gets to explain to a federal attorney why she was stalking government property and creating false documents. The local charges are bad enough, but the federal implications make this much more serious. She picked the wrong ranch to target. The morning that had started with such promise had turned into a circus. Police cars, border patrol vehicles, and curious neighbors who'd been drawn by the commotion filled the area around my property entrance. Rebecca stood in the middle of it all, her tactical vest askew, her perfect HOA president image shattered. As they finally prepared to leave, with Rebecca facing a stack of citations and a promise of federal follow-up, she turned to me one last time. "This isn't over. Mitchell, the HOA knows what you're doing, and we'll prove it. You can't hide behind the government forever." Dale escorted her to her vehicle, which she was allowed to drive home pending the investigation. As she drove away, Marcus shook his head. "That woman has no idea how lucky she is. If she'd actually planted those cameras and we'd found them during a security sweep, she'd be looking at serious federal charges." The horses had long since lost interest in the drama and were back to their morning routine. Sentinel was rolling in his favorite dust patch while Guardian and Patriot grazed nearby. My own horses were in the barn, probably wondering why breakfast was late. "Thanks for coming out," I told Marcus as he prepared to leave. "I had no idea she was planning something this elaborate." "That's what we're here for," he said. "Partners look out for each other. But Jack, you might want to invest in some security cameras of your own. Legal ones. Something tells me this woman isn't going to give up easily." He was right. Of course. Rebecca Thornton had built her entire identity around being the HOA president who protected her community from environmental threats. Being exposed as a fraud who harassed law-abiding citizens and manufactured evidence wasn't something she'd accept quietly. As the last of the official vehicles pulled away, I was left standing in my driveway, looking at the pond that had started all this trouble. It was the same pond my grandfather had dug with a borrowed bulldozer. The same water that had sustained our cattle and horses for decades. Crystal clear, tested regularly, and home to a thriving population of fish and turtles. But to Rebecca, it was a symbol of everything she thought was wrong with the world. Old families with old land, who didn't answer to HOA committees or environmental crusaders. People who knew their rights and weren't afraid to stand up for them. Ranchers who had the audacity to let horses be horses, splashing and playing in water that had been there longer than any housing development. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the recording I'd made of the entire encounter. Every moment from Rebecca's arrival to her ignoble departure was captured in high definition. If she wanted to play the social media game, I had my own ammunition now. The sun was climbing higher, and the day's work wasn't going to do itself. 6 horses needed feeding, stalls needed mucking, and fences needed checking. But as I headed to the barn, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Rebecca Thornton had declared war. And people like her didn't give up just because they'd lost the first battle. Duke whinnied as I approached, demanding his breakfast with the imperious air of a horse who knows he's the boss. I scratched his neck and promised him extra oats for being such a good boy during the morning's chaos. Behind him, Sentinel stood at attention, probably hoping for similar treatment. "You did good today, boy," I told the Border Patrol horse, even if it was just baking soda. "You exposed her whole scheme. Agent Rodriguez owes you some extra carrots." As I went about the morning feeding routine, my phone buzzed with text messages. Word was already spreading through the ranching community about the morning's events. My neighbor Jim texted, "Heard Rebecca got herself in trouble with the feds. Couldn't happen to a nicer person." Another message from Sarah, who ran the feed store, simply said, "About time someone put that woman in her place." But mixed in with the supportive messages were warnings. Tom, whose ranch bordered the Ridgeview Estates on the other side, texted, "Watch your back. She tried this with me last year, but I didn't have Border Patrol backup. She's got the whole HOA board in her pocket." The war with Rebecca Thornton and the Ridgeview Estates HOA was just beginning. She'd fired the first shot with her environmental crusade, but she'd chosen the wrong target. Between my grandfather's meticulous record-keeping, my legitimate contracts with the Border Patrol, and now video evidence of her fraudulent schemes, I had everything I needed to fight back. But as I finished feeding the horses and watched them settle into their morning routine, I realized something important. This wasn't just about me or my ranch anymore. This was about standing up to people who use false authority and manufactured outrage to bully their neighbors. Rebecca had probably run similar schemes on other properties, other families who didn't have the resources or connections to fight back. Well, she'd picked the wrong ranch this time. And as Sentinel demonstrated when he exposed her testing kit, sometimes the truth has a way of coming to light in the most unexpected ways. The battle for the pond was over, but the war for the community had just begun. The peace lasted exactly 48 hours. That Thursday morning at 6:30 a.m., I woke up to find bright orange notice of violation stickers plastered across my front gate, my mailbox, and even on the fence posts along the road. Each one had the Ridgeview Estates HOA seal, which I was pretty sure Rebecca had designed herself using some free online template. The violations ranged from the ridiculous to the insane. According to these notices, I was in breach of noise ordinances that didn't apply to agricultural land, architectural guidelines that had no jurisdiction over properties outside the HOA, and my personal favorite, failure to maintain aesthetic harmony with the surrounding community. Apparently, my 100-year-old ranch was ruining the view for people in houses that had been built 5 years ago on former farmland. I was pulling down the stickers when my phone rang. It was Jim Henderson from the next ranch over. "Jack, you need to check the Ridgeview Estates Facebook page. Rebecca's lost her damn mind." I pulled up the page on my phone and felt my blood pressure spike. Rebecca had posted a 20-minute video titled, "Environmental Criminal Protected by Government Corruption." The production value was surprisingly high, with dramatic music, carefully edited footage from her previous visit, and charts showing water contamination levels that I knew she'd fabricated. She'd even hired someone to do a voiceover in that true crime documentary style. The video had already been shared over 300 times. Mostly by her HOA supporters and environmental activist groups, she'd somehow convinced that I was destroying the local ecosystem. The comments section was a war zone, with locals who knew me defending my family's ranch against an army of keyboard warriors who'd never set foot in Texas, but were convinced I was the second coming of Captain Planet's worst enemy. But Rebecca wasn't done. As I scrolled through the page, I found posts dating back weeks where she'd been building this narrative. Photos of my horses taken with telephoto lenses, edited to make them look distressed. Water samples she claimed were from my pond but could have been from anywhere. Even aerial drone footage of my property that I'm pretty sure violated several privacy laws. I called Marcus Rodriguez immediately. "We've got a problem. Rebecca's escalating, and she's trying to turn this into some kind of environmental movement." Marcus sighed heavily. "I saw the video. My supervisor saw the video. Hell, the sector chief in El Paso called asking if we were really boarding horses with an environmental criminal. This woman is causing us real problems now. That afternoon, I had a meeting with my lawyer, Danielle Morrison. Dan had handled my grandfather's estate and knew every inch of the property's legal status. He reviewed Rebecca's notices with the expression of someone who'd seen too much stupidity to be surprised anymore. She's got no legal standing, he confirmed. These notices aren't worth the paper they're printed on. But that's not your real problem. Your real problem is the court of public opinion. She's winning the social media war. He was right. By that evening, Rebecca's video had over 50,000 views and had been picked up by several environmental blogs. They'd twisted the story so thoroughly that I barely recognized it. According to the internet, I was running an industrial horse operation that was poisoning groundwater and destroying wetlands while hiding behind government connections. Friday morning brought reporters. 2 news vans parked outside my gate, waiting for a statement. I ignored them and went about my morning routine. But they filmed everything they could see from the road. Of course, Rebecca showed up within an hour, dressed in a new tactical vest with Environmental Protection Volunteer emblazoned across the back. She gave an impromptu press conference right there on the public road, complete with visual aids and her doctored water test results. What we have here is a clear case of environmental injustice, she declared to the cameras. Mr. Mitchell thinks that because he has connections with the Border Patrol, he can operate above the law. Well, the citizens of Ridgeview Estates are here to say, enough is enough. Behind her stood about a dozen HOA members, all wearing matching t-shirts with Save Our Wetlands printed on them. I recognized most of them. People who'd moved here from cities and suburbs, drawn by the rural charm, but determined to remake it in their own image. They held signs with slogans like, "Horses don't belong in wetlands," and "Government contracts can't hide environmental crimes." I was in the barn brushing Duke when Dan Morrison called. "Don't talk to the reporters," he warned. "Anything you say will be twisted. I'm preparing a cease and desist letter for Rebecca and the HOA. But we need to be strategic about this." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my grandfather's face. He'd built this ranch with his own hands, survived droughts and market crashes, raised a family on this land, and now some suburban crusader with too much time and too little sense was trying to destroy it all with lies and social media manipulation. Saturday morning, I woke to find my fence had been vandalized. Someone had spray-painted "Water Killer" across the wooden posts in neon green paint. They'd also left dead fish scattered around the pond's edge, obviously store-bought and placed there to create a scene. The security cameras I'd installed after Marcus's suggestion had captured everything, including the license plate of the car that had dropped off the vandals at 2 a.m. But Rebecca was smarter than I'd given her credit for. When Dale Patterson came to investigate, she'd already prepared her defense. Those could have been environmental activists acting independently, she said with fake innocence. When people see injustice, they sometimes take matters into their own hands. I certainly don't condone vandalism, but I understand the frustration. The reporters ate it up. The evening news ran a segment on tensions rising over ranch water rights that made it sound like I was somehow both victim and villain. They showed the vandalism but also ran clips from Rebecca's video, creating a false equivalence that made me want to throw my television through the window. Sunday brought a new twist. Rebecca had organized what she called a community water testing day, where volunteers would take samples from various water sources around the area to prove my pond was contaminating the watershed. The problem was, she'd planned to trespass on multiple properties, including mine. To get these samples, Marcus called with a warning. We've been monitoring her social media, and she's encouraging people to document evidence by any means necessary. That's incitement to trespass. Possibly worse. We're coordinating with local law enforcement, but you need to be careful. I spent the day reinforcing my gates and putting up additional no trespassing signs. Jim Henderson and several other neighbors came by to help, forming an impromptu alliance of actual ranchers against the HOA invasion. We'd all dealt with Rebecca's type before. City people who moved to the country and then complained about the smell of horses and the sound of roosters. She tried this with me last year. Tom Washington said, as we installed a new gate lock, claimed my cattle were causing emotional distress to her members because they could see them from their windows. I told her if looking at cows caused her emotional distress, she needed therapy, not a lawyer. The community water testing day was a circus. About 30 people showed up at the Ridgeview Estates Community Center, all wearing matching t-shirts and carrying testing kits that looked like they'd been ordered in bulk from some scientific supply company having a clearance sale. Rebecca stood at the front with a PowerPoint presentation about water contamination and ecosystem destruction. I watched the live stream on my phone, alternating between anger and disbelief as she showed doctored photos and fabricated test results. She'd even created a map showing how my pond allegedly connected to every water source within 5 miles, complete with animated arrows showing contamination spreading like a plague. Now, we'll split into teams, she announced. Team A will approach from the north, Team B from the east. Remember, we're documenting environmental crimes, so be thorough. If anyone confronts you, remind them that environmental protection is everyone's responsibility. But Marcus and Dale were ready. They'd positioned officers at key points around my property and other ranches in the area. The moment the first team tried to cross my fence line, they were met by law enforcement. The resulting confrontation was captured by multiple cameras, including news crews Rebecca had invited to document her Citizen Science Initiative. "This is public obstruction of environmental justice," Rebecca screamed as Dale calmly explained trespassing laws to her volunteers. "We have a right to protect our water. You have a right to test water on public property or your own property." Dale replied patiently, "You don't have a right to trespass on private land, no matter how noble you think your cause is." Several volunteers, faced with actual legal consequences, quickly abandoned the mission. But Rebecca's core group of about 10 true believers tried to push forward, leading to several arrests for attempted trespassing and disorderly conduct. The news cameras captured it all, including Rebecca's meltdown when she was handcuffed. "This is what environmental protection looks like in corrupt Texas," she shouted as they led her to the patrol car. "When the government protects polluters instead of the people." The arrests made national news. Environmental groups started picking up the story, and suddenly my phone was ringing with interview requests from CNN, Fox News, and every outlet in between. Dan Morrison advised me to stay quiet, but the narrative was spiraling out of control. That's when Elizabeth Chen entered the picture. Dr. Chen was a highly respected environmental scientist from Texas A&M who'd heard about the controversy and decided to investigate for herself. She called me Monday morning with a proposal. "Mr. Mitchell, I'd like to conduct an independent environmental assessment of your property," she said. "No agenda, no BS, just science. Would you be willing to allow that?" I agreed immediately. Unlike Rebecca's theatrical production, Dr. Chen arrived with a small team of graduate students and actual scientific equipment. They spent 2 days taking samples, measuring water flow, documenting wildlife, and studying the ecosystem around the pond. While they worked, Rebecca was released on bail and immediately went back on the offensive. She started a GoFundMe for her legal defense, claiming she was a victim of government persecution. The fundraiser raised over $20,000 in 48 hours from people around the country who'd bought into her narrative. She also filed a lawsuit against me, the Border Patrol, and the County Sheriff's Department for conspiracy to suppress environmental activism. The lawsuit was as ridiculous as it sounds, full of sovereign, citizen-style legal gibberish and citations of laws that didn't exist. But it generated more headlines and more social media outrage. Wednesday afternoon, Dr. Chen called with her preliminary results. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to share something important. Not only is your pond not contaminating anything, it's actually improving the local water quality. The plants and natural filtration around the pond are removing agricultural runoff from neighboring properties. You've created what we call a constructed wetland, and it's functioning beautifully." She offered to present her findings publicly, and we scheduled a press conference for Friday morning, but Rebecca caught wind of it and tried to preempt the announcement with another video, this time claiming that I'd bribed the university to produce fake results. The press conference was held at my ranch, right by the pond. Dr. Chen presented her findings with the kind of methodical precision that only a real scientist could provide. She showed actual data, explained her methodology, and even invited reporters to observe her team taking additional samples. "What we have here," she explained, "is a perfect example of sustainable ranching practices. The Mitchell family has maintained this ecosystem for generations, and the biodiversity we've documented is remarkable. There are 3 species of native fish in this pond that are becoming rare in other parts of the county due to actual development pressures." Rebecca showed up halfway through. Of course, with her remaining supporters, she tried to interrupt, claiming Dr. Chen was part of the conspiracy, but the reporters had finally caught on to her act. When she couldn't provide any actual evidence to counter the scientific data, she resorted to personal attacks. "This is what corruption looks like," she screamed, pointing at me. "Dr. Chen and the assembled officials, they're all in on it. The ranchers, the government, the universities. They're all protecting each other while our environment dies." That's when Sentinel decided to make another appearance. The Border Patrol horse had been grazing nearby, and something about Rebecca's shrill voice must have reminded him of their first encounter. He walked over to where she was standing, calm as could be, and began sniffing her pockets. "Get away from me," Rebecca shrieked, backing away from the horse, but Sentinel, trained to be persistent when investigating, followed her. He was particularly interested in her vest pockets, where she'd stuffed what looked like more testing vials. The camera caught the perfect moment when Sentinel's investigation caused Rebecca to trip over her own feet, sending her sprawling backward into a patch of mud. She came up sputtering, covered in muck, her dignity as thoroughly destroyed as her credibility. The photos went viral within hours, becoming a meme about karma and horses having the last laugh. But the real blow to Rebecca came from an unexpected source, Margaret Davidson. One of the founding members of the Ridgeview Estates HOA, had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with Rebecca's tactics. She came forward with internal HOA documents showing that Rebecca had been using HOA funds to finance her crusade without board approval. She spent over $30,000 of HOA money on lawyers, testing kits, and that video production, Margaret revealed at an emergency HOA meeting that evening. Money that was supposed to go toward community improvements. She's been falsifying board meeting minutes to hide the expenditures. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove Rebecca as president and to pursue criminal charges for embezzlement. The revelation that she'd been stealing from the very community she claimed to be protecting was the final nail in her credibility coffin. Over the next week, the truth continued to emerge. The water testing company Rebecca had hired admitted she'd pressured them to alter results. The video production company revealed she'd provided them with fabricated data and insisted they make the charts look more dramatic. Even some of her core supporters began to distance themselves as they realized they'd been manipulated. The legal consequences piled up quickly. Besides the embezzlement charges, Rebecca faced federal charges for interfering with government operations, state charges for filing false reports and trespassing, and civil lawsuits from the HOA and several neighbors she'd defamed. The woman who'd started out trying to destroy my ranch with false environmental claims was now looking at serious prison time. Marcus called to update me on the Border Patrol's position. "We've completed our security review, and you're cleared to continue boarding our horses. In fact, we're so impressed with your operation that we're considering expanding the contract. Sentinel hasn't been this healthy and well-trained in years." The story took one final twist when investigators discovered the real reason behind Rebecca's crusade. Her husband, it turned out, was a developer who'd been quietly trying to buy up ranch land in the area for a massive subdivision project. Rebecca's environmental activism was actually a front to drive down property values and force sales. Text messages between Rebecca and her husband revealed the whole scheme. They'd identified several properties, including mine, as key parcels for their development. The plan was to create enough controversy and legal problems that owners would sell rather than fight. The environmental angle was just a cover for a good old-fashioned land grab. When this information became public, the environmental groups that had supported Rebecca dropped her like a hot potato. Real environmental activists were furious that she'd used their cause as a cover for greed. The final video she posted, a rambling 40-minute rant about conspiracies and persecution, was watched mostly for entertainment value. 3 months later, I stood by the pond, watching all 6 horses enjoy their morning swim. The legal battles were mostly over. Rebecca was awaiting trial on multiple charges, and the ranch was peaceful again. The Ridgeview Estates HOA had elected new leadership and formally apologized for the harassment. Dr. Chen had published a paper on the ecological value of traditional ranching practices, using my pond as a case study. We'd started hosting school groups to learn about sustainable agriculture and ecosystem management. What Rebecca had tried to destroy had instead become a model for environmental education. Jim Henderson stopped by that afternoon with a 6-pack of beer and some news. Did you hear? Rebecca's husband filed for divorce? Apparently, he's claiming she went rogue with the whole scheme, trying to save his own skin before the fraud charges hit. We sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The horses were grazing peacefully. The pond reflected the dying light like a mirror, and somewhere in the distance, a family of deer picked their way through the mesquite trees. You know what the funny thing is? I said, taking a sip of beer. If she just asked nicely, I would have given her a tour, explained the ecosystem, maybe even let her bring school kids out here to learn about water conservation. But she had to turn it into a war. Some people can't see past their own agenda. Jim replied. She looked at this place and saw dollar signs, not the generations of work that went into it. Her mistake was thinking she could bully her way to success. The next morning brought a final surprise. A package arrived with no return address, containing a USB drive and a note. The note read, "Thought you should see this, a friend." The drive contained hours of security footage from the Ridgeview Estates Community Center, showing Rebecca planning her schemes, coaching volunteers on how to trespass, and even practicing her dramatic presentations. But the most damning footage was from a meeting 3 days before her first visit to my ranch. She stood before a small group of investors, presenting my property on a slideshow. Once we force Mitchell out, this 60 acres becomes the crown jewel of Phase 3. We'll have pond-front luxury homes starting at $800,000 each. A year later, Rebecca was serving a 5-year sentence for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Her husband's development company went bankrupt after multiple lawsuits. The Ridgeview Estates HOA had implemented strict oversight policies to prevent future abuses of power, and my ranch, it thrived. The Border Patrol expanded their contract, bringing in 2 more horses. We partnered with the university to create a research station studying sustainable ranching practices. School groups visited weekly to learn about ecosystem management and traditional agriculture. The sun climbed higher, and the morning's work, called 6 horses, had become 8. The ranch had new purpose beyond just survival, and somewhere in a federal prison, Rebecca Thornton was probably still ranting about conspiracies and environmental justice, but here, on the land my grandfather had carved from the Texas wilderness, life went on as it always had. The horses swam in their pond, the grass grew green after the rains, and the legacy of generations continued unbroken. Rebecca had tried to destroy it all with lies and manipulation, but in the end, truth and tradition had prevailed. As Duke splashed Sentinel with a playful sweep of his tail, causing the normally dignified Border Patrol horse to snort in mock indignation, I smiled. Sometimes justice comes in the form of handcuffs in courtrooms, and sometimes it comes in the form of happy horses swimming in a pond that nobody can take away.